Aviva Markowicz, who is managing director for NUMA in New York. Welcome, Aviva. Please welcome also Rob Moffat, who is a partner. He's a VC at BALDERTON Capital in UK, and Xavier Menchez, who is the head of technology for Business France in North America, but on the East Coast. And it's interesting, because obviously when it comes to talking about startups going global and thriving in the USA, everyone thinks about the Silicon Valley, which has been the talk of the town, some kind of global legend for decades now. But maybe that legend, the myth, is now a little bit overrated. Maybe there are other spots, other promised lands in the USA. That's what we're going to be discussing in the next 20 minutes. Thanks to those guys who are working on a day-to-day basis, side by side with companies trying to go global and to thrive in the USA. First of all, is it still, according to you, to your experience, California or bust? You know how people put it in the 1930s. Is it possible not to be in the valley if you're a startup trying to thrive in the USA? What do you think of it, Aviva?
So I would say that the valley has still this something special where you get the talents, things are going very fast. It's a quite impressive ecosystem that you wouldn't find anywhere else. But for the last years, there's been a large interest and energy and wave of entrepreneurs choosing New York rather than Silicon Valley for a lot of reasons that I guess we'll tackle.
You're based in New York yourself.
I am based in New York. And just to give you the context, the reason why NUMA decided to choose New York over any other places in the US was because we realized that more than 80% of our alumni that expanded to the US had chosen New York to start their activities. And we've been naturally following our network.
Xavier, what is the point of view? You're based in New York yourself?
Yeah. Is that better now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm based in New York now, but I was in San Francisco for 6 years before that. And
please closer through the mic, because there's a lot of noise, please.
I'm in New York now, but I was in San Francisco for 6 years, helping French entrepreneurs set up in the Silicon Valley to become a global company. And I would say most likely it's a good idea to be in the Silicon Valley if you can do it. You don't have to do it. Certainly some French companies or European companies have launched successfully in the US without being there. One example that I've had at top of my mind right now that went through our program is AB Tasty. AB Tasty, they didn't need to go there. They've launched a year ago in New York, already have 30 employees now. So it's possible. I'm sure we'll go into the details of when it's a good idea or not. So.
Yes, yeah, we're going to get back to it. What's your point of view, Rob? Because you're a VC yourself. People keep saying it's in the valley that there are as many VCs as you may dream, VCs all over the place. What do you think of the inevitability of the valley?
So I think it's I was going to say something rude, but it's not valid. You look at the data, it's a completely non-valid statement to say you have to go to the US now. You look at Adyen, which is going to be a $7 billion IPO. Its HQ is in Amsterdam. The CEO is based in Amsterdam. You look at Supercell. It's a company that's based in Finland that's worth $10 billion. You look at the venture scene. The biggest venture investor in the world is SoftBank. SoftBank have based their Vision Fund, their $93 billion fund, in London. So absolutely there is the money, there are the role models, there are the companies here that can go all the way in Europe.
Okay, so maybe it's some kind of dream, keeping your activities in Europe, your research center in Europe, your operational center in Europe, getting in touch with the valley, having searchers, maybe investors there, and how is it possible to get the best of both worlds when it comes to developing your company? Obviously, you're pushing companies that way, Rob. So
our view is we're European. We invest in European companies. We are based in London. We have one office. At the same time, 3 of my partners built very large businesses in the US. Bernard Liautaud built Business Objects from France to the US. Lars Nielsen, who is Danish, was at Uber and Dropbox. So we have people who have those great US networks who've done it themselves.
Sorry about the noise, Rob.
It's good. I'm going to start rapping soon.
Yes.
So, and So these people who have these networks, we know the great US VCs. We can help companies build sales offices there. Sometimes it makes sense for the CEO to move, and sometimes it doesn't. But you need that partner who has those great connections.
Xavier, because obviously Business France's job is to try and help companies to get the best of both worlds between France and the global scale. How do you manage to do so?
So first of all, obviously when we think that some companies have to go, it's essential for them to go to the US market, it's because it's when they're operating on a market that is much more mature in the US, much bigger, and that the competition has been seen as just has an advantage in the US, and not being present there would be a problem. We never think that it's a good idea to put your developers or the R&D team in the US. It doesn't make any sense. If you would see the wages that people are paid in the Silicon Valley or New York, it's absolutely ridiculous, and this is true also in sales and marketing.
If you want to hire a data scientist in the Valley, it's gonna cost you a fortune.
Well, there's no such thing as a 5-figure salaries there. Yeah. So it has to be 6 figures if you hire even a young person, most likely. But for sometimes it's just a matter of survival. I think that sometimes it's really important for companies to be close to the ecosystem. Now, Silicon Valley itself over some other tech hub, we can discuss it, and it has changed lately, I think. But if you have a deep need to be connected with the ecosystem, I'm talking ecosystem, not your clients.
Yeah.
We all know that clients are mostly on the East Coast. But if the ecosystem counts, I'm going to throw out just an example here. Algolia, French company, they sell to the developer community. Makes a lot of sense to go in the Valley.
And for you, Aviva, what is the best way of remaining European and be American as well? Maybe the answer is just go to New York, but other than that.
Are there a lot of entrepreneurs today in front of us? Yes? Some of you are in the US already? Not yet?
No, American dream, in fact.
It's the American dream. But so maybe one very practical tips, and one of the mistakes I've seen over and over and over through, we've seen more than 400 startups trying to expand. Staying in France and hiring a sales in the US that you will manage remotely and that will do the work is usually the most expensive mistake you can do. Because first, yes, sales people are very expensive, and you tend to go to more experienced sales profile, but it doesn't work. You need to have the founder locally. You need the CEO to be based in the US, because you're the one that has the vision. You're the one that will be able to adapt the market fit. There's a really high probability that what you're selling and what's working on your local market has to be adapted to the US. So you need the founder to have this vision. So I would say, in terms of the team, yes, it's definitely cheaper to have your development team and maybe the product team based in the local market, but as a founder, it's crucial that you're doing the move.
We were talking about the American dream. It may become a nightmare if you don't do it properly. What are the main roadblocks, the main traps you need to take into consideration to anticipate if you want to avoid them? Aviva, in your experience, and every one of you guys after that.
So I would say the number one, and it's part of our selection criteria. So today, NUMA is helping non-US founders to enter the US. So they can come really from everywhere. The number one, outside of having the CEO with us, is also the cash flow and what is your runway. We typically will take startup that has not less than 6 months of runway, because it's such an expensive city. It might be a bit less expensive than Silicon Valley, but actually not that much. So making sure that you actually have at least 6 months of runway in front of you to be able to test, and your sales cycle will be between 3 and 6 months.
Don't be over-optimistic, don't be naive, in fact.
Exactly, because we've seen a lot of startups losing it all because they didn't expect that high of a cost entering the US market.
Obviously, Xavier, you've been helping companies to tackle such problems. What are the most important ones, the more risky ones?
I think the riskier part of launching a business in the US from a European perspective is hiring. Hiring is tremendously hard from you're unknown on a huge market and you're not competitive. Even if you're kind of a leader in Europe or, whatever country you're from, it may not be, you have to understand that a salesperson who's going to help you for the first time, your first employee, most likely he's in debt, he comes out of college, even if he's not coming out of college, he's 35-year-old, but he's still maybe paying like $100,000, $200,000 worth of debts or whatever. They're not that, we see Americans as better at taking risk, but on that, taking a shot of working for a foreign company that is kind of small is hard. So selling your vision is hard. That's why the CEO commitment is important. At least at the beginning, I agree that the CEO can be somewhere else later before a period of time. But minimum, I don't know, a year or something like this, it have to be there. So hiring is the hardest part, and adapting your processes. If you hire a salesperson and you ask him to do, or her, to respect whatever sales process you've built in Europe, it may be very different, especially in terms of being specialized.
A real cultural gap, which become an operational gap between operating in France and in the US.
Typically, I'll give an example. Salesperson do lots of things in France, so they will be kind of the SDR and the account executive and maybe the customer success manager at the same time. If you ask an American person to do that, he'll stay about 3 weeks, and since it's a very fluid market when you can leave a company whenever you want, they will do. They will be like, I have no marketing support, I don't know why I'm asked to do this, and they will leave. So that's adapting your sales process, marketing process, and everything is very important.
And according to you, what are the main obstacles or maybe the time-ticking bombs?
So I'd agree completely that hiring is the biggest challenge. Americans, particularly American salespeople, interview extremely well. They've been prepared their entire academic career to interview, particularly the heads of sales, and so everyone seems amazing. And you realize in real life, some of them are very mediocre. Second challenge, I think the answer to that is it's very easy to hire and fire. So you have to hire people, and you'll find out within a month if they're good or not, and if not, then you part ways, and it's okay. That's what happens in the US. I think the second piece is how you build a brand, an employer brand. How do you get people excited to work for you? How do you hit the ground running? And the third challenge is the temptation that you'll have client calling you from Atlanta, another client calling you from Seattle, another client calling you from Florida. And it's very tempting to get these great leads, and people start jumping on planes all over the place and end up far too spread out and have no impact.
But if you allow me a pretty provocative question, is it possible to go global, to scale up your tech companies without being in the US?
In consumer, it's possible. So you look at games, you can use global platforms and build global companies in games from Europe, and that's been done at billion-dollar scale. I think in software sales, it's hard. It's genuinely hard.
Aviva, do you agree?
I would say that, yes, there's a lot of examples, and luckily there are examples of startups that are today successful without the US chapter. I mean, BlaBlaCar is, a very famous one here. But from the startup we see, and they're coming from Mexico, from India, from the Ukraine, from everywhere, there's still this investment gap and the question of the valuation. And for a lot of them, they just don't have access to the investment in their local markets. So in order to be global, they know that at some point they will need to incorporate mid-VCs in the US. So it's still a really painful point in most of the ecosystems.
In fact, you need to have a US credibility, just like street cred in rap. Okay. Xavier, obviously, Business France staff is operating on a global scale. Do you agree with Aviva's and Rob analysis on this point?
Yeah, so the reason why we created the Impact program, this acceleration program that runs for 10 weeks in the US, first in San Francisco, then in New York and all that, is it's not only to succeed on the US market, it's to become a global company. I think that most likely for B2B enterprise, company with higher sales ticket, you kind of have, yes, to be in the US. It gives you the credibility. We've had clients that just by having the first reference in France
Yeah.
actually managed, in the US, managed to sell easier in France then.
Rob, you've got something to add?
I was just going to say two more examples of global businesses scaled from Europe. The Hut Group, which in e-commerce, which is a billion-dollar revenue business that sells in China, across Asia, the US. The HQ is still in Manchester in the UK. And also a business, Revolut, that raised a massive funding round very recently, building a consumer fintech business globally from the UK and from Russia.
But getting back to the US, there is a whole territory, a whole union outside of the valley. The valley is not the whole California, it's not the whole US. There are other spots, other cities, other areas which are really striving when it comes to the tech business. Los Angeles has been pushing in the last years. You guys are in New York, which is booming. Other countries, Denver is also the talk of the town. Maybe you could give us a few instances of other critical points where it may be interesting to base your US company. Rob, or Aviva, go ahead, Aviva.
That's a great question. Yes, there's no just one or two epicenters in the US. We actually have seen startups choosing to be based out of Boston as an example when it comes to AI, because all like university research centers are based there. On the East Coast, when it comes to automotive industry, you have Detroit, where you have a lot of headquarters.
And Detroit is back big time.
Yeah,
it has
exactly.
been destroyed by the crisis, but they're back,
Yes,
obviously.
through entrepreneurship.
Yes.
So we've seen Austin being a growing hub for the industry 4.0. So I would say that as a startup and as a founder, you want to go where your clients is based. New York has now, the Fortune 500 are there. Lots of headquarters. If you're in B2B, it makes sense. But there are some other spots across the countries for different verticals and industry. That makes sense.
Rob, what do you think of it? And maybe what are the spots that are clicking on your dashboard?
So we had our CEO get-together for all our portfolio 2 weeks ago, and we talked about how to go to the US. And it's very hard because everyone went somewhere different. There was a music company, Cobalt, where LA was exactly the right place to go.
LA is the place to be if you're in the music business.
Depop in fashion is LA. Aircall, it was New York. Talent, it was San Francisco. It's very hard to generalize.
Yeah, and according to you, Xavier, because we have been all over the place, we were discussing about, we were talking before the panel about Denver, which is a very interesting city.
I know that there's some other tech hubs, and yes, they're growing, and New York is probably, in my opinion, the best examples because they've been growing a lot, and the volume is pretty impressive, especially from European companies setting up in the US. Now, I just want to say San Francisco or the Bay Area is still 40% of the investments in venture capital investment in the US. And if you, once again, I think the key point is being close to your clients is important only if the being close to your ecosystem is not more important. And sometimes it may be more important in a valley.
We've got that funding point. I think it is easier to get funded right now in Paris than it would be in Boston, for example.
And I'm going to be picking a question that comes from the audience, thanks to Strido. It says the successful stories outside the US are numerous. However, are the conditions still better in the USA for a startup? What do you think of it? We've got one very last minute. Rob?
Well, I think immigration rules in the US are getting worse and worse. And immigration is a huge driver.
No
Obviously,
more
I come
dreamers.
from the UK, and they're not getting very good in the UK either. But I think that's a great advantage for continental Europe, is being able to bring in the best people from around the world.
Xavier, do you agree?
The largest companies are still coming out of the US so far, and I think they have an edge in terms of market adoption still and processes. The process sales and marketing processes are just the standard, the international standard.
We have 40 seconds, so maybe just one very last question, because it's a very interesting one. How should European founders adapt their pitches to American VC culture? Rob, it's for you.
Get straight to the point and talk about the really big picture.
Aviva, Xavier, another advice?
Value proposition first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say be straight to the point is the most important thing.
Be straight to the point, the American way. You've been straight to the point, guys. Thank you so much